This is Interview, a show where we speak with and learn about the lives and experiences of interaction designers, be them traditional graphic designers, people in business or product design, or even sound design. Interaction design covers so many things from packaging, how you hold a box and where your fingers are placed and what they're covering up, to the cues of music and sound effects, to, of course, what you traditionally think of as visual user interface design in games and apps. In a phrase, my aim is to learn about the experiences that make the experience makers. I'm Aaron Heath, and today my guest is Benoit Perreault, an interactive and motion designer currently working at Ubisoft Montreal. Ben's career has been primarily in the game development industry. Since 2003, he's worked on a variety of well-known projects and gotten the chance to see the role of interaction designers evolve in games. He's currently working on a yet-to-be-announced game, and his last major project was Eidos's Deus Ex, Mankind Divided, released in 2016. Ben, thanks so much for joining me today.
Hi.
So first, I kind of want to get started with your history as a designer in the field. And the question I always love asking people is how they learned about what design is, because when you're a kid, you don't grow up thinking you want to be a designer. It's not like an astronaut or a fireman. We usually don't have any idea what these things are. So how did you learn about what design kind of is and that you wanted to do it?
I guess I was lucky. I kind of learned it pretty young. My father is an architect, and my mom does a lot of painting. So, during my childhood, there was always like drawing tables, pen, brushes, ink,
Yeah.
rolls of paper. So I kind of always knew I was going to draw or design something.
Hmm.
Didn't know I would end up in game development, but yeah, I was kind of always knew I was either going to be in architecture or
Some
you know
artistic field.
yeah, something like that.
Was there a time where you leaned more heavily in the artistic side of things and like more fine art and painting? And how did you kind of move over to the more rigid, structured design side of it?
Well, I always did a lot of drawing. Even in my teen, I was doing airbrush. So yeah, I was kind of leaning toward the fine art.
Hmm.
But at some point, it was just like, okay, I'm gonna need to have a job. So
Yeah,
how can I turn this passion into a job? And for me, graphic design was the way to turn it into a job.
it's kind of the closest bridge between maybe illustration and a more, like you said, focused career path.
Yeah, exactly.
So, did you go to school for design?
Yeah, when I was 18, I moved to Montreal. So just to explain a bit, I come from a small town called Rouyn-Noranda. It's 400 miles north of Montreal, so very small city.
Probably even colder.
Yeah, even colder than Montreal. And everything over there revolves around natural resource. So a lot of mining, woods, forests.
Okay.
So nothing in design or art. So at 18, I moved to Montreal where I studied graphic design for 3 years. Back then, we were learning Flash. Flash was owned by Macromedia at the time. So it
Yeah.
was Macromedia Flash 3, I guess. That's where I did my studies.
That was a really fun time on the internet because just every website out there was just flash this and flash that, and everybody was doing so much gaudy stuff, but it was so cool and fun and new at the time.
Yeah.
I remember things like, do you remember PlayStation?
Uh,
It was like a really popular designer's portfolio. It was kind of a big deal. It was one of those things where everybody in the scene at that time was
yeah.
obsessing over it and things like that.
I remember my inspiration back then were Too Advanced was really big.
Yes, I was going okay, Too
Yeah.
advanced is always the thing I think of and ask people, and no one ever knows. So I
Yeah.
thought,
Well,
I'll go with PlayStation this time because he's probably
yeah.
not gonna know anything about it.
Yeah. No, I mean, Eric Jordan was
Yes.
was big inspiration when I was in school.
I went to the website maybe a month or so ago to see kind of how it's evolved since then, and I was a little disappointed. Um, but yeah, just every time he released a redesign, I remember loving it. And, I was a teenager at the time learning, so I was just
Mhm.
mimicking it as much as I could.
Yeah, just being able to drag. They had like windows that you could drag and resize on his website. And I was just like, wow, okay, that's new. You can drag stuff on a
Yeah.
web page. That was for me. That was it, right? That was a click.
Talking about that, the thing that was kind of unique about him is he integrated sound and UI in an era where websites, weren't focused on that kind of interaction, and he integrated a lot of 3D work in there too. And so all
Mhm.
of that, if you think about it, it applies pretty well to game development. So I can see how that kind of influence led you down this path.
Yeah, it did inspire me a lot to go into. So I did my studied in graphic design, but I was heavily drawn toward by web design.
Hmm.
So when I got out of school, I immediately got a job into a small advertising studio where we were doing a lot of newspaper ad, billboards, companies, logos, business
Yeah,
card, but that type of.
traditional stuff.
Yeah, exactly. But on the side, we were also doing a little bit of web design, but very corporate still. But then one day, I saw a job opening for a web designer position at Ubisoft Montreal, and that was the door how I got into game. Right, it
Yeah.
was through a web designer position.
So that was a while ago. Ubisoft must have been quite different at the time, or at least smaller or more nimble in a way. Like, how did you transition from the web design gig to how you've ended up now more in games?
Back then, that was in 2003. So, so yeah, it was a while. Ubisoft was in Montreal, but fairly small. It was
Yeah,
under maybe like 500 people, which is kind of still pretty big. But today it's like close to 3,000. So
they were
it's
just a gleam in Viacom's eye at the time.
so yeah, so I started doing Flash website for them. We were doing site for upcoming games. It was really cool. But then at some point, my manager told me that there was this development team. We're looking for an extra game designer, not game designer, sorry, an extra graphic designer to help them with some mission briefing videos and some UIs. So I said yes, and I went and started to help them, and that was it. I never went back to web design. I stayed in game development since.
Had you been interested in games previously? Like, were you playing games as a kid growing up or anything like that?
Yeah, growing up, I was playing a lot of NES games, so a lot of Ninja Gaiden, but also Diablo on PC. Warcraft, not the World of Warcraft, but the original
Yeah,
Warcraft.
yeah. Some classic PC games in there too. So it was always kind of a passion, but had it ever been something you kind of considered going into before that, or were you just so focused on the design aspect and finding a job that, like, did it ever cross your mind that it could be a path?
Not really, because back then, I don't know why. I think my thought was that to work in game, you had to be a 3D artist. So to do either modeling or animation or texturing, that sort of art. And for some reason, I didn't see the connection between graphic design and game development back then.
Yeah.
But as soon as I got my chance, I saw how much it's relevant, and it's a part of game development. There's so much UI these days.
Most of your career has been in games now, but when you first started, when your background was mostly in web,
Mhm.
and they brought you onto that first project. Do you think that your background with Flash websites? Do you think it allowed you to bring something different to the table that maybe people who had gone to school for game design and these more specific projects? Do you think it gave you kind of a unique take on things?
Maybe because back then, a UI team on a game development project consisted mostly of like one or two artists, one or two programmer, and that was it.
Yeah, maybe
So
maybe
so
more the people doing it were more traditional engineers or fine artists who were doing
yeah,
concept art or things like that.
yeah, exactly. So the aspect of the graphic design aspect was less present.
Yeah,
Also like navigation flow. These days, well, not these days, but even back then, doing a menu flow is very similar to what you would do on a website. So
right.
it was very close. It was very easy to transition, and it
Yeah,
probably helped me a lot, in terms of designing an arborescence or a menu flow.
and I think that's kind of an interesting point. Information architecture is something that there's still plenty of firms out there who do interaction design and or do UI design and they don't do that kind of flow or any architecture around it. And so I imagine back then in game design it was even more so that it was just people kind of coming to it with just that art background and not thinking
Mhm,
about it from a usability perspective.
mhm. But that was then. Now it changed so much in the last 10 years. It's insane. Now we have UX designers,
Yeah.
which was a word that didn't even
Right.
exist back then. So
I saw that you had worked in Singapore for a while too. So were you actually living there?
Yeah, I was lucky enough to live there for 3 years. I moved there when Ubisoft Singapore opened a studio. So I got in touch with them through HR and through management. And lucky enough, I was just finishing a project. I was finishing working on Far Cry 2 at the time.
Mhm.
And I took a big vacation, did a trip to Japan. And I met some of the guys that were working at Ubisoft Singapore. So I had the chance to meet them in person. It was around Tokyo Game Show, so the timing was just right. I
Yeah.
had the chance to meet them, and it clicked. So I got the offer and went there, relocated, and ended up staying there for 3 years.
Had that been the first time you kind of traveled, especially to that degree?
No, lucky. Yeah, I was lucky before that. At some point, I also went to Ubisoft Shanghai. I went there to help them on a project.
Oh wow.
I went there for 6 months. So again, it was just I was working on a game and talking to people on the team. I learned that one of them was one of my coworker was relocating to Shanghai, and he was going to work at Ubisoft Shanghai. So asked question and found out that one of the project over there kind of needed help with their UI. So
Mhm.
got in touch with their HR, and they made it happen. I was there for 6 months, helped them with the project they were trying to ship.
It seems to me like it's always seemed to me that Ubisoft studios are such a melting pot of kind of cultures and different people. So I imagine even at the Shanghai studio or at the Singapore studio,
Mhm.
it's a lot of people from all over and a lot of different cultures. Do you think, living there, kind of how did those experiences shape your view on design? Is it culturally, was there something you took away from Singapore that kind of affects how you look at things and how you work now that you maybe weren't thinking of before those experiences?
Working abroad is for me was a big eye opener because you get in touch with so many different culture, and like you said, Ubisoft Singapore and Ubisoft Shanghai, they're a melting pot of so many different culture. You've got a lot of people from Europe. You've got Americans, you've got all the different studios in Asia, so a lot of people from Malaysia, Indonesia. So
Yeah.
so you're in this kind of weird bubble where you've got so many cultures. So
Yeah.
it's really eye opening. It's nourishing. It triggers a lot of your inspiration.
I think of things too like accessibility nowadays is becoming a bigger topic in games with colorblind modes and things like that. And
Hmm.
I feel like part of that is just the industry has grown to a point where people are now able to say, "Oh yeah, I meet people with those sorts of experiences, and now I'm thinking about designing for them." Is there anything you can remember like that? Like any example where you were working with someone in particular and they said, "Oh hey, don't do this, or maybe do something this way, or use this color, or something like that," because of like some cultural or background that they had that you had never even thought of.
Well, there's one weird interaction sometime. So I was working
Yeah.
in Shanghai, and we were all fighting about a specific feature, and it was this big thread going by email, and everybody was fighting everyone about how we should do this and that. And so at some point, I just sent a mail saying, can we all stop bitching and just get on with the work? But turned out a dude came to my desk and he was like, "I'm not a female dog." And it just the expression just got lost in
Yeah, yeah.
translation, and it was just sad, and it was weird because he was really sad. He was, but
It
so
was taken as such a bigger insult than it was meant to
yeah,
be.
exactly. I wasn't trying to insult anyone. I was just like, even like talking to myself. It was like, okay, can we all stop arguing? But I said bitching, which
Yeah.
is probably not the best word to use, but
Right.
that's how it came out, on the moment. But yeah, he was super offended, thinking I was treating him of a female dog. But
Yeah.
it's the kind of challenge we get when you travel and you work in multicultural environment. You have to be careful
Right.
to language. Sometimes we don't have all the same level of proficiency in English. Even myself, right? English is not my first language, so some my intonation or my speed, my flow sometimes won't be perfect or right or
Yeah, that makes sense. I love hearing those sorts of stories where I think it's in China, World of Warcraft. China has something against seeing bones
Okay.
I believe I might be wrong about this, but games like World of Warcraft, there's a skeletal race, the undead, and so
Hmm.
they kind of have to design around that. So all those sorts of cultural things, especially with how big the industry's gotten and how many places those games go, and how Ubisoft kind of sets up and has all of these cultures coming into and working on them, I always find fascinating in all those stories. Kind of talking about that, you mentioned that
Hmm.
you were in those discussions fighting for a certain feature. Like, obviously, every project is different, but in your career and your experience, how much input and how close are you to designing aspects of the game and features and things like that?
I guess in a game project, I think everyone's got a voice. So everyone can come up with ideas and opinion, but you have to be willing to defend it, right? So if you express yourself well, I think everything can be said or expressed. At least
Hmm.
at Ubisoft, it's kind of like that. It's a very open environment where people are allowed to comment on almost anything if it's done in a respectful manner. And even like sometimes the features, when let's say I get a task and there's a design document attached to it, sometimes the design document is can be very loose, so I can interpret, and there's places for everyone to put a little bit of themselves in it.
Talking about game projects, they take so long to make and
Hmm.
so many things change along the way. Like, at what point are you coming in, and do you find that you do work that has to be completely changed because a feature is completely cut, or because other things are changing so often?
Well, that's the reality of game development, right? We start with a vision, but the vision is a constant evolution, right? Like you
Hmm.
said, it takes AAA game takes so much time to make. So by the time we're at the end and that we can see the big picture, it's kind of too late to change everything. But all that time we've been building the UI as the game is being built
Yeah.
and trying to adapt as fast as the game is changing. And then at the end, we're like, okay, so that's the game we're shipping. We have to at some point we have to change stuff.
Yeah.
But sadly, sometimes it's too late. We don't have time to change anything in the UI. We have to ship it as it is, or it's like trying to hit a moving target. It's really difficult.
Yeah, I bet. So yeah, so I guess when a project starts, is your role a lot more kind of research focused then?
Yeah, you try to build reference document, style sheets. We're going to build walled and try to print stuff that inspires us,
Yeah.
document it as much as possible.
So I know most of your background has been in games, but in the past 10 years, mobile phones and the app industry has
Mhm.
exploded. And I think that's brought a lot more attention to interaction design and UI and everything like that. What do you think are the unique challenges for making a UI for games versus kind of websites or apps?
Specific to game, accessibility, like you said, but that kind of goes for everything. But
Hmm. It's always seemed to me that with games, the aesthetics actually
Mhm,
matter a lot more because they are a part of the world building. Whereas if you're building an app, like, obviously you want it to be on brand and you want it to
mhm,
look nice. But
mhm.
I think in the design field, especially kind of in school and college, a lot of people, you get this pushback on aesthetics, and everything
Yeah.
has to be done for a reason and usability. And I think that's kind of one of the interesting things about game design, is that's one of the areas where, no, there are times maybe where the aesthetics matter more than the usability to enhance kind of the immersion almost.
Yeah, no, you're right about this. There's the part of storytelling. There's a storytelling element or world building, like you say.
Mhm.
That's part of the aesthetic you're trying to build.
So you've worked with Ubisoft for quite a while now. We
Mhm.
kind of touched on it a little bit already, but have you noticed any kind of, like, what shifts have you noticed in the industry and how they as a whole treat interaction design and UI design? I guess you kind of touched on how you now have straight up UX positions, whereas
Mhm.
10 years ago maybe you didn't.
Yeah, exactly. The UI teams gotten a lot bigger. Back then, the programmer that would work with us were usually junior programmer who were waiting to have their break for a gameplay programming position or
Yeah.
AI or rendering position. So, but now these days you'll see UI programmer who've been doing it for 5 or 10 years. So they, they really built an expertise toward UI programming. Also, like you said, now we have UX designer that really helps. They
Mhm.
help us to iron out all the design document, They come up with wireframe menu flows, so that helps a lot. So we can, as UI artists, we can focus more on the visuals, the aesthetic, the effect, the storytelling element, all that
Yeah.
good stuff.
And just in case people don't know some of
Mhm.
these terms, wireframing is kind of the idea of laying out the content without paying attention to the aesthetics or the way it looks. It's more about the flow, like you said. The menu flow is kind of the same thing. You can speak to that too.
Yeah, you have to think of it as wireframe are like your blueprint. So
Hmm.
they're like the blueprint of your UI. So think of it of just boxes with word, but just defining that is a big part of the job. So once you have your wireframe, you have your blueprint. It's much easier to build your UI upon, and it's like a house. You start with foundation, and then we can put all the pretty stuff in
Yeah.
it.
Right, exactly. You've worked on a lot of projects now, Deus Ex being the most recent one.
Exactly.
What project do you think has taken you most outside of your comfort zone in terms of, the look and feel and also the way it works? And how did you kind of get around that and work with it?
Like you said, the last project I worked on was Deus Ex. That was with IDOS Montreal. But that game was very sci-fi-ish, and I did a lot of game that had sci-fi element in it. But the one that took me out of that sci-fi element was Far Cry 2.
Yeah.
That was a while ago, but it's one of the project where, like you said, it took me a little bit away from my comfort zone, which is more of the techno sci-fi graphic design.
Hmm.
And that one was more of everything needed to be tangible, physical. So like your map was an actual 3D.
I was going to ask, how much input did you have on that? Because people love that. That still gets talked about.
Yeah, well, that map was actually my sketchbook that I scanned.
Oh,
I
wow.
scanned my sketchbook. I put it up in Photoshop, and that was the foundation for the menu, for the map, and a lot of the graphic element that came out. Yeah.
That's great. So, I mean, obviously that was maybe the most challenging for you, but clearly you adapted well and made something really great out of it.
Yeah, it was challenging, but very rewarding. And back then, the creative director on that project was Clint Hawken. And his goal and his mandate for us was to come up with immersive, diegetic, and very minimal UI solution. Because he really wanted the game to focus on the rawness of the environment and the characters. So it had to be very immersive.
Yeah, and I think that game is remembered like very fondly for those elements in the gameplay and for the UI in that respect too. And it's interesting because it was doing it at a time where nothing else was doing it. You talking about diegetic and the skeuomorphic elements, like that didn't really become a conversation until a few years ago with the iPhone, and then more normal people got to hear about that in everyday life. So it
Yeah.
seemed like that was pushing some boundaries.
There was also another really good game that came out with that type of UI. It was Dead Space. I don't know
Yep.
if you've played it.
Yes.
So them too. It was kind of similar, but totally different visual
Right.
style.
Yeah.
But like you put up your menu, but and the game is not paused, so you're running around with your menu in your face, and it's hiding all of your screen, and you've
And
got
so much of the
monsters.
HUD elements were kind of like in the backpack sort of suit. I mean, like in the physical world.
Yeah, like the life bar was on
Yeah,
his spine, and it was a very diegetic game,
it definitely was.
very well thought UI.
And they were ahead of their time in a
Mhm.
lot of ways because you still don't. I feel like the conversation now is you're seeing that more and more. People talk more and more when UI is too much in their face. Or
Exactly.
there's too much. The Division kind of tried to do the diegetic thing in a
Mhm.
similar way to Dead Space, but that's years after the fact. You still don't see it to the same degree, even though people definitely want that kind of thing, and it makes sense for a lot of games.
It's just very hard. I mean, these days the games are so complex. There's
Hmm.
so many different system working. You need feedback for so many things. So trying to find a way to translate it into a physical thing or object, or map it on a character, it's kind of hard. So yeah, you end up with a very busy HUD, a very busy screen with lots of UI.
Yeah.
But that's a challenge. That's where we have to fight. So sometimes some of the places where we can try to mitigate that is by having a lot of options, so people are able to turn off and sometimes resize some of the element.
Yeah,
That's kind of the
the goal.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, people really appreciate that. That always gets talked about a lot. I know for Horizon Zero Dawn, they had it so where every element could be set to fade away or completely off or on.
Hmm.
And that was a really nice touch. So I definitely see more and more developers kind of doing that in the long run.
One thing which I would like in the future is, but again, we're always like short in time when developing,
Yeah,
but
right.
is if we could have like some UD preset, that would be nice. So let's say you could have like the UI designer preset.
Yeah.
So this way you would get the visual configuration that I would
See how
use.
it's intended to be to see.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you could have a couple of different configuration, that'd be nice. A little
Yeah,
bit
that would
like
be.
you have for your control. So.
And speaking of games,
Mhm.
obviously this is your career. You're doing this. Are you still playing games? What have you been playing recently?
Recently, I'm still playing some Rocket League.
Okay.
It's a really fun game.
It's good for quick matches. It's good for
Yeah,
getting in and out.
yeah, it's easy to play, but so hard to master. It's
Yeah.
for me, it's a really good toy. It's a really good game, and it's fun to play with friends. So, and like you said, short game, short burst of fun. Yeah, so I'm playing this. Played Metal Gear Solid. Yeah, I'm kind of late. I've got a big backlog of game
Yeah.
that I need to play.
Yeah, especially right now you have
Yeah,
Zelda and Horizon and all of these big hitters coming out that
yeah.
everybody's raving about.
I guess my next game that I'll play will probably be Horizon.
It's definitely great. I really enjoyed my time with it. And then my last question, what's something you use in everyday life that is just giving you issues that you'd really like to change something about?
I think it would have to be my desktop experience at work, like having to go to work and log in on a specific computer to
Oh,
be able
okay.
to work. So,
Yeah.
like, if I could just log in from any PC, anywhere, have all my apps, all my data, all my file, and just work from everywhere, that would be awesome.
It would be great. Yes.
Yeah.
Uh, my fiance has a startup I work at with her, and some of my role there has been kind of setting up a server, making sure everybody has a space, making sure that the server is fast enough that they could work off of, setting up a VPN so you can get on it
Hmm.
anywhere because it just makes it so much easier. Of
Hmm.
course, it never works. It never works right. Something's always wrong, but that's definitely the dream.
Yeah, that's a dream because you kind of can do it with remote desktop or some other application, but running a game engine and a couple of software like Photoshop or After Effects at the same time from a remote desktop is probably not going to be super
I
efficient.
I'm
So
sure. And
yeah.
loading all that stuff up, even I noticed that with just Creative Suite after a while, when things take too long to load and you're waiting there and you're going through this workflow that you have to do every day, your mind
Mhm.
wanders and you kind of lose focus and you get less done.
So that would be it. Being able to work from anywhere, anytime. That'd be the best.
Okay, that's a good answer. Well, that is all I have for you. Is there anything you want to, pitch? Do you have a Twitter account you usually post to or any kind of social media or links like that people can find you at?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter. Just look for Benoit Perreault, which is a little bit hard to
I'll
spell.
have a link for that in the show notes.
But also, I could give you one or two really good reference. There's this talk on the GDC Vault. I don't know if you know that site.
Yeah.
There's a really good talk by the lead of Destiny, the
Yes.
lead UI of Destiny.
I have
There's
been chatting with him I'm trying to get him on. I've watched that. It is fantastic.
Yeah, a lot of good insight in his talk. Also, there's a guy who actually works at Ubisoft, Wong. He did
Hmm.
a really good talk on art direction and graphic design in games. Highly suggested to watch that too. It's very apropos for the type of podcast or article you're doing.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for giving me all this time. Like I said, this was great.
Yeah, it was really great talking to you.
Yeah, you
I'm
too.
looking forward to your future videos and all that good stuff.
And that's all for us. You can follow Ben on Twitter or on his Tumblr, and you can see more of his work at his website. All of these links will be listed in the show notes. I want to thank Ben again for speaking with me. And if you're interested in being on the show and are involved in interaction design in any way, be it packaging, business, sound, graphics, send me an email. I'd love to chat. Aside from that, you can always let me know what your thoughts on the show are as well. Right now, the plan is for a weekly release schedule, both as a podcast and on the Review YouTube channel as an audio-only video. On the next episode, we'll be speaking with Dan Auer, who is a senior UX designer at CBSI working on sites like Giant Bomb and GameSpot. I hope you'll consider tuning in again next time. Thanks for listening.